What's up, boys and girls? Creepstore from Creepstore Inc. here, and today I'm back for some more awesome Yu-Gi-Oh content, and today we are here to do a top 5 budget decks for the 2016 format. This is a really important topic because we are coming into a new format because of the new ban list completely destroying Draco Pals. So with this new format, we've gotten some new decks moving up in terms of just the top tier decks, and we're here because a lot of budget decks are coming into play because every new format, a lot of people pick up the budget decks because they want something to play that isn't expensive and can easily compete with the meta. If you're looking for something to play, this is a place to come look and come check out because budget decks are, again, budget friendly and usually pretty fun and can do some stuff against the meta. So, first deck in the top 5 list, so for the number 5 slot, we have Gangsings. This deck has a lot of awesome mechanics, especially that everything in this deck floats. The only problem with this deck is that since everything floats, their effects are kind of like confusing when it comes to chain links. What happens is that in chain links 2 or 3, they lose their effects, which is the biggest downside of this deck. But a lot of this deck is really fond of is making really explosive plays, like they are geared towards making synchros, especially Baxia and the other dark guy that I don't remember the name of, but it has a lot of great combos, and this deck is really, really fun. It also came out in Cross Souls, so a lot of people don't remember it because it's not really very common, which is why it's in the number 5 slot, and it just gets outpaced by a lot of the decks that are out nowadays and are in the top slots in terms of tier 1 and whatever. But nobody really plays it that much. It's Worms, came out in Cross Souls, I think I already said that. But this deck can do a lot of really crazy stuff. I think Baxia is used in the Synchronous Fusion or whatever Synchro Fusionist deck because it just adds to the Synchro plays for the Fusion whatever thing that goes on in that deck. But this deck just gets outpaced, and it's a little too reliant on what the opponent needs to do, because your opponent needs to get rid of your stuff so that you can float into the other guys, so you can just bring them back out and do whatever you need to do. So it's just a little too reliant on what your opponent needs to do for you to make plays. So that's why it's in the number 5 slot. The chain link thing, along with it, just gets outpaced, and it's a little too reliant on your opponent. Drops it down to the number 5 slot. Next up, we got Satellars. This is an awesome deck that was in top tier slot for a while until it got hit in terms of the new format came into play, and a lot of the decks just outpaced it to a point where it really couldn't compete with it. Nowadays, it's just really rank 4 based, which is what it was when it was originally made. But they have cards like Travera, and is very consistent, very powerful, and they can make cards also like number 86, which is ridiculous when you just drop 5 under there and your opponent can't really do anything because it's unaffected by everything. But this deck's only problem is it has things like that are out nowadays that are like Dark Law, Light Mirror, Vanities, which isn't really a problem, but just stopping your opponent from specialing, or stopping your opponent from using light monster effects, or stopping your opponent from just using its extra deck like Domain does. It just gets outpaced and outclassed by a lot of the effects that are out nowadays, or that ones that came out around the same time. But just nowadays with the top tier stuff, it can't really compete as much as it used to. Sure, you can still take this to an event and do very, very well, but I just think it's better for you to just stick with other decks other than this. That's why it dropped down to the number 4 slot. This deck just isn't all that powerful nowadays because it just gets outclassed, outpaced, and can get stopped by a lot of traps and spells that a lot of people play nowadays more often than they did before. Next up, in the number 3 slot, we have Masked Heroes. Masked Heroes came out a while back, and it gave a big boost to the Elemental Hero deck. The only problem is that the only real things that people are drawn to this deck is that they have things like Dark Law, and you can make it out of 3 structure decks. The only thing about this deck is that since you have Dark Law, you can stop decks like PK and a lot of decks that are really reliant off the grave. But other than that, you are a little too reliant on cards like Dark Law and Shadow Mist, and it just doesn't really do much other than that, along with your opponent being able to even play Prohibition and just call Dark Law. You can't really do much if you can't make Dark Law, and if you need to advance the game state, you can't really do anything without relying on Dark Law, because first turn Dark Law is really what the deck is made to do, and if you can't do that very quickly, or if you can't do that at all, you're pretty much dead in the water. Sure, you can throw some rank 4s here and there, but it's not going to get you to where you need to do what you need to do in the game state. and that's reason why it's in the number 3 slot. A lot of people really do like this deck, and it can do a lot of things. You can take it to like a locals. I don't really recommend taking it to event because you're going to get outclassed immediately. You're not going to get very far, and if you do, it's mainly because you got extremely lucky or you just had some crazy tech cards that I'm not thinking of right now. But particularly, I don't think this is a deck that you want to be taking to a big event or anything, but it is very fun to play, and since it does give a boost to heroes, it is extremely fun and does all this crazy shenanigans. Only if it has Stratos, but we don't have Stratos, so whatever. But again, a lot of the big draw factors to this is that you can make it out of 3 structure decks, and that helps out a lot of players out there that can't make like tier 1 decks like Cosmo and whatever's changing and whatever's coming out and whatnot, that can't really afford to do those things, because still, even with premium gold, infinite gold, it's still pretty hard and pretty expensive to build Cosmo or Burning Abyss in particular as well, because a lot of people are like, let's just jack up those prices because we're buying every single copy of every single card that came out of them. Anyway, so in the number 2 slot, I didn't think I needed to write anything down here for these because these 2 slots are pretty like self-explanatory. Frightfur came a while back, I think in Cross Souls if I am correct, but a lot of this stuff didn't get to us until recently. But the main factor of this is that, again, it's very budget friendly like all the other decks on here. But the main thing about this deck is that it is an OTK based deck, and having an OTK based deck is really important in this format and really scary for a lot of decks out there, because having an OTK based deck is pretty powerful, because a lot of the decks can't prepare themselves or don't play traps to prepare for OTK based decks. That's why the Monarch OTK or Magical Explosion, whatever it was called, was so scary, because they didn't have really anything to side against it. They didn't have anything to try and stop it, because it just like chicken game and do this, activate traps and do all whatever it did, because I didn't really look into it that much. But this thing just was widespread so fast, and the only really thing that they needed to hit was chicken game to stop them from doing anything. So now they're dead, you can't do it anymore. But OTK decks are really powerful, and this can just make OTK monsters really easily, or just set up big OTKs, because the big thing is that they make these fusion monsters that just do ridiculous things, making OTKs. And the only downside of this deck is that you need to get into your Fluffles, or you need to get into your Edge Imps to get into your Frightfurs, and you can't do it all that easily. It just gets outpaced because you have to try and wait for your components, because a lot of times, almost every time I've played a Fluffle deck, I have beaten them. No matter what deck I've played, I've just beaten them because I've been outclassing them. They just keep like toy vendoring into another toy vendor, and it doesn't help them out that much. And you rely on toy vendor a lot, because a lot of times you can't get into the materials you really need, and a lot of times you're just sitting there waiting for your materials and you can't get them. Next up, I think you guys already know what this deck is. It's probably self-explanatory in terms of the format. This is a tier 1 deck, and it's pretty much like $30 if you want to go get it. It is Monarchs, guys. This deck came out a while back. I think it was like 2 months ago, maybe. Probably 2.5. And this deck dropped, and people went nuts. This deck is extremely powerful. Sure, it has its bricking problems, but people have found ways around that, and personally, I still like the build that I'm playing. Sure, it's a little bit not the greatest, but it does whatever it needs to do. But anyway, this deck is in the tier 1 slot nowadays, especially because of how efficiently this deck works and how powerful it is. We got Idea and Eidos, which just made the Frog engine, just put it to shame. And then we got ourselves Ether and Erebus, which Ether just dropping the monsters left and right, and the ability to stop your opponent in like the middle of a play and just drop these monsters on their turn just by banishing one Monarch spell or trap card. And then Erebus to recycle Monarchs out of the graveyard that you need, or even Majesty's Fiend, if I remember correctly. If I'm reading it correctly, you can just get a Majesty's Fiend out of the grave and then just make a Majesty's Fiend, or just get the Aether or the Erebus you need. The deck is really powerful, because it can just, make all the, domain for one, you got Erebus, you got Aether, you got the entire deck pretty much shutting down most of the top tier decks nowadays, and it has a really good matchup against Cosmo and pretty much every other deck out there, except for maybe decks that don't like tributing, but there's a card that already does that called Massive Restrict. Anyway, this deck is extremely powerful, and again, you can pick it up out of a Walmart for like 30, 45 bucks plus tax. I don't know. I might bump up the price of the structure decks nowadays because they know what's going on. But you can pretty much pick this up online for 30 bucks. That's what I did. And then I just threw in some higher rarity stuff that I had. And you have a deck that you can take to pretty much a regional and do really, really well. I took top 16 at my OTS championship, if I remember correctly. And yeah, I played this, and I played cards like Vanity's Ruler, for God's sake, and that's a really crazy tech card. And you can play cards like Maxi in here, you can play cards like Effect Veiler in here, which a lot of decks do nowadays anyway, but this really, really works well with a lot of the hand traps out there, and it's just amazing. It has cards like Pantheism that are the nuts. It's an upstart that only costs a Monarch spell trap card, and you're already going to draw a lot of those anyway. And then you got cards that are just the nuts. This deck is amazing. The only bad thing about this deck is that the Monarch Mirror Match is terrible. You never want to play the Monarch Mirror Match. That's the worst thing that you're going to have to do in your life. It takes forever, and it's just at this point, when you're playing a Monarch Mirror Match, you just want to flip a coin and see who wins. Like, they're really bad. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I would like to hear your guys' feedback of what you think is the best top budget deck in the comment section below. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching this video. If you liked it, hit that like button as hard as you can, and subscribe to my channel for some more awesome Yu-Gi-Oh content. And as always, hope you enjoyed.